Hello, everybody, and welcome to VAFF's Go Global Lunch and Learn today with the Racial Equity Screen Office. I am Barbara Lee. I'm the founder and board chair of the Racial Equity Screen Office. First, I'd like to start with acknowledging that we are coming from the unceded and ancestral territories of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish nations, and we are very fortunate to be able to live, work, and play on these lands that have been part of the Indigenous communities and who've taken care of these lands since time immemorial. So today we are going to talk about going global. And with me is Akeena Legall, who is RESO's Communications and Engagement Lead. If you've never heard of RESO, the Racial Equity Screen Office, a little bit about ourselves. We are a Vancouver-based national not-for-profit organization dedicated to advancing Canada's creative economy by empowering racialized content creators. Our mission is to elevate and amplify racialized voices while building sustainable pathways for their stories to reach both Canadian and global audiences. We work at the intersection of culture, business, and policy by partnering with industry leaders and government agencies to remove systemic barriers, transform policies, and create equitable opportunities for racialized creatives. Through capacity building programs, expert development initiatives, and strategic collaborations, RESO drives economic growth, fosters innovation, and positions Canadian diaspora stories as competitive cultural exports on the world stage. So Regina Liang, VAFF's Director of Industry and Operations, is behind the scenes. Regina and I'll be asking her to just flip the slides for us as we go. So Regina, next. So that's a little introduction about Akeena and myself and RESO. Next slide. So what we're going to present today is basically some market intelligence that we had gathered over the last 2 years with different programs that we do in the Asia Pacific region. We have looked at 4 particular markets: South Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, and Hong Kong. So today, the majority of the work that we have done is in Korea. I have been to 3 Canada-Korea trade missions. 1 was virtual and 2 was in person. So in 2024 and earlier this year, 2025, we went as part of the creative industries team to meet with film and television industry in South Korea to learn about their markets. And then we've also brought our delegates, producers, and writers there to learn more and also to work together and collaborate with South Korean studios, SLL. So we were commissioned to do this market research and scan to give Canadian producers, especially those who are new to certain Asian markets, a high-level introductory overview. This presentation is not meant to be an exhaustive market study. Instead, think of it as an orientation, a mapping of the terrain, and to give us some grounding as we think about opportunities in Asia Pacific. The scan covered, as I said, covered Korea, Singapore, Taiwan, and Hong Kong. And today, my section will be on the Korean section, and Akeena will cover the other 3, Taiwan, Singapore, and Hong Kong. So, as I said, Korea is the most work that we have done. Next slide, Regina. So, as you may know, I'm not gonna read just from the slides, but I'm gonna add to some of the slides. So as you may know, Korea is one of the fastest growing content hubs in the world. What makes it unique is a combination of 2 things. First, domestic dominance. Korean audiences love their local films and dramas. Even when box office numbers dip, Korean films tend to hold or even grow their market share. Second, global expansion. Korea has become a cultural powerhouse abroad. We can see this everywhere. Parasite winning the Oscar for grossing over $260 million worldwide. Squid Game becoming Netflix's biggest series launch ever. BTS filling stadiums around the world. Blackpink headlining Coachella. So Korea's isn't just producing content for itself, it's building global demand. And for us in Canada, this matters not only because Korea is lucrative, but because it's also a strategic, trusted partner. This year marks 60 years of bilateral relations and the Canada-Korea Year of Cultural Exchange. That's why you see a lot of Canada being spotlighted throughout the trade missions that we've done. When we were just at ACFM, the Asia Content Film Market in Busan in September, Canada was a country of focus. So there is a lot of goodwill between our two countries. And Canada's reputation as a country that's stable, rules-based, legal system makes co-production feasible here than in many other markets. We also have a very long history of co-productions. We have the most co-production treaties with other countries. Now what we're trying to do, what RESO's work is trying to see how we can activate them. So the co-production work is very mature with Canada and the European countries. However, throughout the Pacific, that is not the case. There are very few co-productions, what we call formal co-productions. They follow the treaties. So there's been a very few number of them since many of these treaties were signed. So what we are trying to do, the work RESO is trying to do, is to find ways very strategically in small numbers to go to these markets with delegations and find ways to open them up. So also some of the speakers from Asia Pacific and Korea, they see Canada very positively. We had the Asia Pacific Roundtable at EXNW back in July, our summit. And one of the Asia Pacific delegate executives that came said that they see Canada as a gateway to a broader global market because of our diaspora population, and that we can attract co-productions not only with Asia, but also with Europe and other agencies. So a lot of our content that's spotlighting other cultures is also a gateway to the English language markets. So a lot of positivity there. Next slide. So when we look at South Korea, you can see that 36.5% of their top 50 films are English language. So Korean domestic films is still the majority, but English language, it is, over a third. So there's a lot of opportunity there as well. Next slide. Okay. So some of the things that we want to talk about is the players, platforms, and localization. So let me so many of the ecosystem. So Korea is a unique domestic film still capture the majority of ticket sales, while OTT is booming, projected in the billions. Compare that to Canada, where our domestic share is under 5%. The contrast shows that what happens when a country pairs strong homegrown content with a global strategy. So that is what you're going to see about their platforms and localization and the players. So the key players is that in Korea, there are two big contextual factors that really shape Korea's industry. First is the chaebol system. These are the big family-owned conglomerates that you hear about, like CJ, Lotte, JTBC, and Kakao. They control huge parts of the pipeline, productions, distribution, even exhibition. In practical terms, this means that they can make or break a project. So for independent producers, that dominance can feel like a barrier because access is tightly controlled. But at the same time, if you can partner with a chaebol, it opens massive doors, not just to Korea, but to global distribution. And as some of you know, JTBC, we've been working with one of its subsidiaries, SLL Studios. So RESO has been able to develop a partnership, and we have conversations with CJ as well and other production houses that are part of that vertical conglomerates, those conglomerates. So it's very strategic, and it's very, it's what I say, that this work needs to be like a scalpel rather than like a shotgun approach, and that is something that RESO does. Second, a second factor with the Korean market is that Netflix has poured billions of dollars into Korean content, and that investment has completely reshaped the landscape. It's fueling worldwide demand for K-dramas and turning local projects into global hits almost overnight. So now looking at the streaming platforms, Netflix is obviously the transformative foreign player, but Korea also has its own domestic platforms. TVing, which is owned by CJ Entertainment and Studio Dragon, Wave, backed by broadcasters, Coupang Play, linked to the e-commerce giant, and Watcha, which has carved out a niche audience. On the studio and distribution side, there are several big players. CJ Entertainment, which is Studio Dragon's parent company, and it also owns TV. Lotte Entertainment is a major producer and distributor, and they also run multiplex theaters. Showbox, known for backing hits like The Host and Thieves, and the Next Entertainment World, or NEW, which produces Train to Busan. Of course, there's a traditional broadcasters, and they still matter, such as KBS, NBC, SBS, and JTB all remain influential, particularly for TV dramas. Next slide. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about some more of the players in there. On the government and policy side, they have COFIC and COCA. They are the two main agencies that provide funding, regulate co-production, and promote Korean content abroad. And across the regions, you have film commissions in Seoul, Busan, Jeju, and others. And that makes filming easier by them helping to handle permits, logistics, rebates, and sometimes even studio space and crew. So if we step back and look at some of this, you have the studios and productions, you have the broadcasters, the streaming platforms, and then government bodies. And then the market context, which is the dominance of the cable system and Netflix's outside role in the international demand. Together, this is the structure that Canadian producers have to navigate when they're thinking about partnerships in Korea. So when we brought producers out there, not only was it just to meet a co-producer, a Korean co-producer that could access some of their incentives and grants, soft money, we call soft money, but it's also have an understanding of how they operate, the way their studios and broadcasters and government and industry operates. And that's some of the work that we do is we bring the delegations over there and we have these meetings. Not only do we just meet with other producers, but we also try to have them meet the studios and the broadcasters and the streamers. And then we also have them sit in with some government discussions that we have so that they can understand the ecosystem and how everything works together in a different market. It's not, often why European co-productions have worked well is because in Europe, they have the similar infrastructure as what we have in Canada. So they have their matching telefilm or matching Canada Media Fund. And the way their tax credits work very well with Canada because the Canadian co-production system was actually built on the European style. So when we go to different regions of the world, like in Asia Pacific, we cannot just arrive there and say, this is the way we do it, and you have to learn, you have to figure out how to work with us. What we want to do is, how do we work together, and what can we bring from our traditional co-productions to the table, but what do we have to leave behind? So that's the way of approaching these co-production mechanics, is that we have to look at, what rebates that we have and what the partner in Asia Pacific might have, the equity splits, and then it says COFIC. COFIC is the film agency and COCA is content, Korean content. So we need to work with those agencies to see how we can actually move any potential co-production forward. Next slide. So one of the first ones is let me just get to my notes, is a case study. So Korean audiences are heavy streamers. 89% of the population uses OTT platforms. Netflix dominates among people in their 20s and 30s. TVing and Wave are stronger among women in their 30s. Coupang Play appeals to more men, while Disney Plus holds steady across all ages. Subtitles are strongly preferred over dubbing. Sports streaming also became a major driver of subscription. So a useful case study here is Drama World. It was co-produced by US, Korean, Chinese, and Thai partners. The cast deliberately combined Korean stars with Western actors to appeal to both domestic and global audiences. And it had a wide distribution: Amazon, CBC, EQ, Unext, and TV. The Impact Drama World proved that K-drama inspired storytelling could travel globally, and that co-production is a viable path to making that happen. So as you all know, most recently with K-pop drama Demon Hunters, that was actually a Canadian IP. So the writer director was Canadian. It was financed through Sony and drew on many of the Korean cultural elements. And so that broke all the records with Netflix, being the most watched animation film on Netflix. And it shows just how popular K content is. And that Canada, with our large racialized demographics and creatives here, that our stories, that we understand the nuances that we have in our community, in our diaspora communities, actually can travel well. And that is, I point to that because it's just such a great example. Next slide. So sales, legal, and entry strategies. So on the sales and legal side, the main thing to know is distribution rights: who sells the films in which regions and how profits are split. A caution here is that platforms like Netflix often want full IP ownership. So, which means you've heard the story of Squid Game, where the creator sold it to Netflix, and then Netflix, it blew up, and he really didn't get any of those profits from it. So when you deal with some of these big distributors and platforms, that's, unless you are, a big name or you have something, some leverage, that's often what they'll ask for, is the full IP. So for other legal things, visas, labor rules, taxes, and Korea's screen quota system, that only really matters if you're actually selling or producing directly in Korea. For most Canadian producers, co-production status is the key piece. This is the gateway to subsidies, rebates, and the ability to bypass Korea's screen quota. COCA grants and COFIC incentives go to Korean entities, so you need that local partner. As well as regional film commissions, Seoul, Busan, Jeju, and others can offer tangible support, such as permits, crews, rebates, even access to facilities. That could also help if you have a smaller production control costs. Something else I heard, that in Korea, the labor laws says that you can only film or work 52 hours a week. So for many people who, who've worked on sets, 52 hours is not the norm when you're in production. So just to keep that in mind. Other local rules you should, brush up on before you start your production if you're going to be shooting in Korea. Next slide. Okay. So market entry strategies, some of the things that we talk about is that really it's best to find that partner, to find that co-producer. And you can do a lot of research by yourself, and there's a lot of initiatives, and also there's been a lot of different festivals who have brought Korean producers over. And if you went to VAFF and TIFF and some of those places, Korea has been a country of focus, And there's a lot of information as people, get more interested in Korea. We are very lucky that we sort of RESO started before everybody did this, I guess, I don't know, rush or wanting to work with Korea. We built some relationships that are quite strong, that we're quite proud of. I know that other organizations has as well, but with ours, one of the things we did was we worked with SLL to think about ways, be creative with ways to enter the market. So what we did earlier this year was the CAPCA program, which is an accelerator program for writers, producers, and we worked with SLL and got two of their original IPs and two of their original IPs, which was worked on by Canadian producers and writers, to adapt it to more of a global audience. And then we took two original Canadian IPs and worked on that with SLL to adapt it for a global audience. And so we have some learnings from that. And what we want to say is that, it takes really what we call thoughtful and curated ways to think about how to be a good partner. And also to understand that our rules for co-production has to find a way to match their rules for a co-production. And that's some of the things that, it's not just going over there and saying, hey, I have this project, let's co-produce together. There are programs there that you need a local Korean producers to help you navigate to get that funding. And then once you get that, then you can look at what the requirements are for the Canadian and the treaty. So right now, just a comment about the South Korea's treaty with Canada. It is, it's outdated. It needs to be modernized. So any treaty that was signed before 2014 is what we call the old system. The new system is post 2014. We are very close. I hear we are very close to signing this new treaty. It should give some more flexibility, and currently it doesn't include film. So that's just something that that's being worked on, and hopefully, fingers crossed, it will be done soon. So in closing, there's a few big takeaways from the Korean market. Next slide, Regina. I went through legal and regulatory. So next slide to that. Okay, go back one. We're not quite there yet. So in closing, I haven't read the slides, but I just wanted to talk about it to give you more of a fuller picture of the market that we're talking about. So in closing, there's a few big takeaways. If you're trying to attract Korean audiences, the most important factor is story and cultural alignment. Korean audiences are deeply loyal to local content. Independent films that bring a clear cultural angle, a strong storytelling hook, or a cross-cultural theme stand a much better chance of connecting. And when it comes to strategy, the real entry points into Korea aren't blockbuster paths or wide theatrical releases. These are dominated by the big conglomerates. For independent filmmakers, the focus should really be on three things. Co-production pathways, because status unlocks subsidies, rebates, and wider market access. So co-production pathway is really, you need to find partnerships. So the next one is partnerships with Korean companies. Since local producers and distributors are the ones who can actually open doors to funding and audiences, you have to invest. So that means you can apply to RESO's delegations to Asia Pacific markets. We just closed our open call to Singapore for the Asia Television Forum, which we're going in December, bringing 6 producers. Then we are probably going to go to Hong Kong again. So look out to find ways to go. But we are a very small organization with very limited funding. So you would have to, I would highly suggest that you either go to festivals that are bringing executives from Asia Pacific region, and that will be a much lower cost for you to start making those connections. And at some point you should invest in yourself or apply for travel grants. So Creative BC has passports to markets, Telefilm has travel. If you're Ontario, Ontario Creates has some programs. I'm sure all the other provinces have programs for travel. But you really have to, go to some of these markets to understand it, to get the nuance if you really want to do co-production. So, and then the third one is that streaming platforms, which really consider streaming platforms, because that's really the places where they are more open to diverse content, to niche or cross-cultural projects. You probably have more success there. So do some research on the different platforms, streaming platforms that are available in South Korea. Try to reach out, always reach out with an email. You never know. Many people, when I make my meetings, I reach out through LinkedIn or through just doing some research on different companies and just introduce myself and say, I'm going to be at this market. Or if you're going to go to, I know that VAFF had some Korean producers, VIF had some, and of course, RESO's East by Northwest Global Creative Summit that happens in July, which I have to do a little plug for, because we do we curate, 10 to 12 Asia Pacific executives that are interested in doing co-productions or have a path that Canadian producers and writers and filmmakers can, and that have some pathway that they could maybe help them with. So we're really looking at ways to open this market through small incremental steps and networking. But a lot of that relies on all of you too. If this is something you want to do, it's not a one and done where you do one thing and expect a co-production to happen. It takes a long time, but it is very worthwhile because there is grants from many of these countries as well as Canada. And Canada in this moment is looking for more trading partners and co-production partners. We can't rely on the US. It's been very volatile. We don't really know what's going to happen. So it's really important that we really lean on our own networks first. So I would say that as racialized diasporic community and creatives, we actually have our own network, and many of our network and people that we know have very strong connections to other markets. And really you need to nurture them. You need to nurture them and not be extractive, but always be collaborative and say, what can we help you with? This is what we need help with. And that really starts there. It really starts with you looking at your own networks and how you can add to that, enhance that, even share it. Often when I take the delegations to these markets, I always say that you are each other's wing person, and that if you meet somebody and it's not a good fit, keep in mind the other delegates that you're with, and maybe you can do an introduction that way. Because if we all work together, there'll be a greater chance of success. And so that is my section on South Korea. I am going to hold off for questions until the very end, but I will pass it on to Akeena, who's going to go to the next slide and talk about the three other markets, which is not going to be as much detail because we haven't worked with them as much. So it's more of a scan. I do want to say one thing is that for Singapore, RESO brought 4 producers last year. And a year later, one of the producers, Teresa M. Ho, is going to sign the first Canada-Singapore co-production deal. There hasn't been one ever for live action narrative drama. So that's pretty exciting. And I think there was some animations, but it's been more than 10 years. So small wins, but very strategic work that RESO's doing. So I'll hand it off to you, Akeena.
Awesome. Hello, everybody, and welcome. Barb gave a great lay of the land for Korea, and I just wanted to shift your attention. Oh, if we could go to the next slide, please. We wanted to shift to 3 additional Asia Pacific markets that, while they are smaller in scale, still offer some pretty powerful strategic value. So based on the wealth of knowledge that Barb shared earlier, South Korea is the anchor of this report for a very good reason. It offers pretty good insight into what is available in a very powerful domestic box office, the global export capacity, and a very mature ecosystem of governmental infrastructure and private capital and vertically integrated media giants that will help support you. So Korea is a great snapshot that teaches us how to build for scale, whereas these other hubs teach us about access. So this is the overall snapshot of these other strategic Asia Pacific markets being Singapore, Hong Kong, and Taiwan. And so while they are indeed smaller when you compare them to Korea, they offer high digital penetration. If you're like a genre producer, there's high demand in these markets for genre content, and they're also really, really great gateways to larger markets within the region. So, that's Southeast Asia, Mandarin speaking territories, and Greater China. For racialized and diasporic Canadian producers, there are audiences available and engaged that want culturally distinct content. And these are the most accessible pathways in the region through co-productions and streaming platforms. As you can see here, Taiwan, Singapore, and Hong Kong each have their creative gateways. Taiwan connects to the Mandarin language content market, and they also have a growing reputation in international art house cinema. So if you're thinking about more niche indie features, this is a great market to position yourself towards, whereas Singapore, because of the high expatriate population and also just the composite language demographic that's in the country, it's a great multilingual financial hub. And their most immediate export priority most typically is to Southeast Asian distribution pipelines. The benefit of Hong Kong is that they are, a legacy player in genre filmmaking, and there's access to mainland China through many co-production frameworks, which we'll go through later on in the presentation. But that's just to give you the framing for all of the numbers that you're seeing on screen. They're not just distinct in creative positioning, but each country also has very different audience behaviors that are driving some of the economic advantages that we're capturing here, whether that's in like box office performance or OTT, or like digital streaming penetration. So Taiwan's film market is projected to grow almost like $500 million by 2029. So within the next 4 to 5 years. There's a young audience, and they are very interested at this moment in thrillers and horrors and dramas that are based and situated within a regional context. Whereas Hong Kong has a huge TV and video market that is almost like $1.5 billion US dollars. We're also seeing very strong streaming expansion in the region, and a lot of the content that is driving that is action and crime genres as well. Singapore, especially when compared to Hong Kong, it's smaller in overall TV market size, but it does have the highest compound annual growth rate across the region. So, that is like the sign of like a rising market. And it's notable for very like a gender balanced streaming audience. So if you are trying to make content obviously like more geared towards women, this is a great market that has like a captured demographic that's keen on the content. And of course, as I had mentioned before, just because of like the cultural and linguistic composite of the population in the country, there's lots of opportunity for multilingual programming. And so, these nuances are very important when racialized producers are considering, okay, I'm entering, this market here, but where exactly do I take my project? There's also, of course, other important considerations, which we will cover in subsequent slides. So if we could go to the next slide, please. So there's benefits and challenges in each of these markets. Barb was able to preface this very well by saying that you really need to be grounded in local context, and through our diplomacy and delegation work, we really do advise that you partner with a local expert, a local producer, to serve kind of as a wayfinder for you to navigate these systems. Some of the benefits and challenges we're going to outline here, but they're not at all, please don't consider them exhaustive or comprehensive. But much of the advantages are framed by like different saturation levels of government incentives, capital, and different like capital and financing frameworks, and also very strong regional networks. As Barb was saying earlier, they each have their CMF, they have their telefilm, and so exploring how they work together in funding distribution capacity, and also in a regulatory capacity, and also like a labor support capacity. So, as I had said previously, Taiwan is being increasingly recognized at international festivals, and Singapore offers pan-Asian infrastructure and multilingual content pipelines, whereas Hong Kong has genre dominance. So each market serves as a gateway to larger regional ecosystems: Singapore to Southeast Asia, Taiwan to Mandarin language markets, and Hong Kong to Greater China. All three markets benefit from, like great institutional presence and supports and frameworks. So there's TICA in Taiwan, IMDA in Singapore, and HKFDC in Hong Kong. These all have the frameworks to support international co-productions. And, I'll go into how they do that when we get to the co-production slide. And, within each of these respective markets, there's also a very established and fulsome tradition of locally based storytelling. So, we mentioned that Taiwan has a rising presence in the international festival circuit because of their art house films. We've all seen like action films from Hong Kong, or as I said, like Singapore has all of these multilingual exports that are available. So it's almost like you can niche down to the language level in terms of targeting different audiences, content that is co-produced there. So those are some of the really great structural advantages, but there are also, I would say, like challenges or things for Canadian producers to note when embarking on projects there and collaboration there. So, and like Barb kind of talked about this before, but these smaller domestic markets mean that the project needs to be almost set up to seed internationally to be financially viable, in terms of how you leverage the different co-production treaties, the financing models. There does need to be a demonstrated success pathway of performance, because all of these markets they're interested not only in domestic performance, but also how they're exporting their own cultural content abroad. So you really need to make a case for that, which is an opportunity, but also, that is something that you really need to heavily consider as you position yourself before going over there. The regulatory environments are different to what we know here at home. Singapore and Hong Kong in particular have censorship regimes that we contextualize in the broader market intelligence report, but there is sensitivity around in Hong Kong in particular, the geopolitical positioning of like their relationship with like Taiwan, and then also in Singapore, just what is considered culturally appropriate in that national context approaches to family, sexuality, gender. So those are really important considerations. So especially, if you're, and we've, in the producers that we've taken on different delegations, we've talked to them about this. If you're like a queer producer and you're promoting queer content, we would probably, the best market signal for you here is probably Taiwan, because they actually have, in the region, they are what we would consider the most friendly to LGBTQ content. There's great LGBTQ content exported out of that region. But if you want to do something that is a little bit more family focused, then yes, you could absolutely lean into Singapore. But a very important consideration as well is to be sensitive of the geopolitical risks in the Taiwan-China relations as well, just because these can complicate release strategies and long-term planning. So, if you're looking to depict one country while you are filming in the other, there's just very important considerations as to how that's politically rendered in the project. Let's go to the next slide, please. So the global demand and localization, as mentioned before, Taiwan's films are making the lap of the international festival circuit and are being awarded with pretty prestigious accolades, and they're very well lauded. A Sun, for example, was shortlisted for the Oscars, and it's also kind of signaled that Taiwan is a serious international contender for quality storytelling. And so that makes it a great entry point for Canadian racialized producers with connections in that market or stories that fit either within the topographical or geographical context, or that could be enhanced by Taiwanese storytelling. Hong Kong action cinema, despite regulatory tightening, is still very globally relevant, especially when compared with co-financing opportunities from mainland partners. And then Singapore has leaned into building content that is multilingual by design. So there's English, Mandarin, Malay, and Tamil, and it's all optimized for Pan-Asian streaming audiences. With a special note on Singaporean content, English is often embedded directly into their productions. Subtitles and dubbing are key tools across all three markets. What we're taking from this is that culturally based storytelling, there's global export opportunities, quite obviously, especially when executed in partnership with local producers and crews. And speaking of local producers and crews, we're going to take you through some of the ecosystems that exist on each national level, because that's some of the frameworks that you'll be navigating. So if we could go to the next slide, please. So each market, much like us, has their own institutional and production ecosystems worth knowing. So in Taiwan, the big one that you'll want to focus on that will guide, how you approach like how you make like an editorial eye over your script to make sure that, everything is in compliance with national laws, also like the labor laws and employment of local crew, and like access to different financing and other institutions. You'll want to look to the Bureau of Audiovisual and Music Industry Development. They play the most pivotal role in international promotion. There's also the Central Motion Picture Corps and Greener Grass Productions are big major players. And on the streaming side, because as Barb had said earlier, streaming is the dominant distribution network in these markets. And also like the streamers, they have the appetite for the content and for purchasing and licensing. So Netflix and AQI, they're dominant, especially when you're trying to reach a younger demographic for your project. So in Singapore, IMDA, known as the Infocom Media Development Authority, they provide cash rebates and co-production support. The major studios that are based here are MM2 Asia and Xiaohui Films, and the streamers that seem to have taken the most interest from like a purchasing and IP acquisition standpoint are VO and Disney Plus. They're the key OTT platforms. And then there's also a regional platform for Netflix, or a regional headquarter for Netflix in Singapore as well. So in Hong Kong, there's the Film Development Council, and they are the administrator of the Film Development Fund. So that is just like the largest financing body. So that kind of governs eligibility there, governs how you would access capital. Production is anchored by players like Emperor Motion Pictures and Media Asia. And, the streaming audiences there are active across several platforms, including Netflix and ViuTV. So, what we tell folks that are considering these markets is that knowing the right government agencies and distribution platform, that can help you structure your project best so that when you go over there and you find your local wayfinder that will help you navigate these environments, you're already set up for success because the government, the government institutions, they almost serve as like the central node in a network that will connect you to all of the other things in terms of like financing and streaming and distribution. So, make sure to know your regulatory and government buddies, because that's how you're accessing all of the capital. And also those are the folks usually that are directly downstream from administering all of the treaties and the co-production agreements. Which, speaking of, let us go to co-production opportunities. So we're going to talk numbers and logistics here. Taiwan has international co-production opportunities that involve Taiwanese partners, and that way you can access subsidies and gain entry into Mandarin language distribution. Taika is very supportive of a variety of initiatives to bridge producers into these markets. So, like I said, it's not just Taiwan that you're getting to access once you go over there. Successful projects are able to be exported into like larger Mandarin distribution networks. Of course, if they are sensitive to all of the geopolitical realities like in the region as well. So that's an important consideration. Singapore is it's like standout in the region in that they offer pretty generous cash rebate programs, up to 40%, capped at 50 million in like Singapore dollars, so in local currency. But I mean, I don't have the exact conversion for that offhand, but it is like a very generous financing package. Hong Kong, co-productions with mainland China via Hong Kong can qualify as domestic under China's screen quota system. And all of these countries, they do have their own internal domestic quotas when they're financing things that they need to meet. And so that's one benefit here, is that if there is partnership through Hong Kong with mainland, it it still counts as like a domestic product. So, just that's important to consider as well when you're building your local producer networks to help crew your projects as well. So it is a strategic advantage for accessing China's massive theatrical and streaming market. And as we had outlined earlier, in terms of genre performance, action, horror, crime, they're very strong performers in Hong Kong and mainland China. And they're very well suited for co-production formulas. So, if those are the projects that you have in your pipeline right now, Hong Kong and the subsequent entry, if positioned correctly to mainland China, could be a really great consideration for you. So we think that, in looking at these composite markets, these different funding mechanisms and distribution access points, they provide a wealth of opportunities that are otherwise very challenging for racialized producers from Canada to reach through traditional domestic channels alone. So these are supplementary or ancillary, or can even be primary in your distribution and even production strategy for your projects. So let's move on to the market opportunity. Obviously, there's commercial viability across all of these markets. As we had mentioned earlier, streaming platforms like Netflix and Iqi in Taiwan are where young people, so say under 25, are going to consume content. And while festival recognition is helping in the export capacity to build prestige for projects that are helmed there. And with Singapore, there's a high baseline for streaming usage. And as we said, there's the multilingual component there as well. So, Tagalog, Tamil, Mandarin, Cantonese, English, Malay, there's many languages in that market. And Hong Kong cinema attendance is still quite resilient, especially for genre films. But contracts in these regions also follow similar patterns to Korea. So rights are typically split by territory, and revenue is shared based on proportional investments. Platforms like Netflix, View, and Disney Plus are aggressive buyers of regional content. But as we said before, the censorship boards, especially in Singapore and Hong Kong, can impose limits on narrative content. So the local consultation there to make sure that your project is viable is key. And as Barb had noted, an important thing to consider going forward as well is when these streaming giants do approach you, it's often for whole IP acquisition. And so that's just something to know as well. Moving on to the opportunity framework. So there, to be set up for success as you, as you expatriate and embark on these markets, you do need institutional and regulatory alignment. So in Taiwan, if you are to go through TICA, there's a myriad of subsidies that you can unlock, and that would provide you access to Mandarin-speaking talent. Singapore, as Barb had noted earlier, has a Canada-Singapore co-production treaty. So partnering through IMDA-backed studios ensures local support and then financial alignment as well. And in Hong Kong, HKICH and Hong Kong China co-productions are one of the most effective pathways to gain quota-free access to the Chinese market. In terms of the regulatory context, Taiwan has a very open creative environment, but all the subsidies require formal local approval. Singapore, and this has to do with the censorship regime that we had mentioned before, but Singapore has a film classification board with very strict standards around, racial, religious, and LGBTQ content. And then similarly, Hong Kong's film regulation has tightened But the Film Development Fund, the FDF, they do continue to support international projects. So, choosing the right partner, understanding the legal environment per market, and tailoring your project for regional audiences and, the regulatory regimes that govern each market. It can be the difference between a stalled pitch and something that is like market ready for either like distribution, production, or ultimately, acquisition by a major distributor. And then if we can go to the next slide. So, like, just kind of like in close for everything, obviously what we've learned through Korea is that access comes through alignment. Co-production isn't necessarily just about money or just about location. It's about syncing up with how the market defines, quality storytelling, and then building trusted networks in those markets. As Barb has stressed, as I've stressed, you do need a strong local partner and to understand the rules and to have a project that speaks to audiences domestically, but also abroad. And so like that, I think, is what makes the work that we do here at RESO so invaluable, is that we guide producers through these markets and have curated opportunities. And we often have we have like direct contacts in the region at some of these studios or these governmental bodies, or we've worked so extensively with Canadian producers from these different markets that, we kind of have an ear to the ground on the inside. Korea is obviously like our most experienced market, but there is opportunities in the broader Asian continent, as we've illustrated here.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry. Thank you. I'm just looking at the time, and we wanted to make sure that we have time for maybe any questions. Yes. I do want to reiterate that Canada doesn't have a formal treaty with Taiwan, but where you can work with Taiwan, if you want to do the treaty route, is to do a multi-party co-production with Singapore or South Korea, Hong Kong, other countries that we do have a treaty with. We have a treaty with Philippines, so we're working on that, doing more work and market intelligence with them. Japan, we have a common statement with them. So I believe there was one co-production a long time ago. There might be something else coming up the pipeline. To answer one of the questions on the chat is that we are working on it. If you have a project and that's specifically with Japan, we can come talk to us. We might be able to point you in the right direction. While we're at these markets, we might be able to keep an ear to the ground for opportunities. If you have any other opportunities, this report, what we did today is just a snapshot of the report that we have on our website that Akeena is building and putting onto the RESO website. It's 122 pages long. So we just wanted to give a high level of the work that we've been doing. It's a market scan. I also want to say that this was a snapshot of these markets at the time we did the research. So it is always evolving. If you go through the research and you see something that's been updated, please send us a note and a citation of where we can find that updated fact so that we can actually fact check it before we make any changes. If it's anecdotal, we can add a section for anecdotals, because we believe that a lot of this work is happening on the ground, grassroots level, between people and their natural networks. And if you're learning anything, please let us know, because sharing and getting more projects will get more projects. It's not where we at RESO believe in an abundance mindset, and that we have been taught to be, to act on a scarcity mindset where we're, not sharing information, not sharing our contacts. But we believe that by sharing it, we actually will all benefit from it. So that is something that we want to leave you with. Please check out our website at reso-ca.org. Lots of information about that. Please like and follow us, because all our opportunities are going to be posted. And we have another exciting opportunity that's going to open up at the end of this week that we're working on. And we just got some good news from the Canada Media Producers Association, CMPA, which is one of our great supporters. And we hope to have many of our community joining the CMPA as they progress in their professions. I want to thank Akeena. Great job. You know, so much information. I know that we threw a lot at everybody today, but we're here to help. We're here to chat. We're a very small team, so if we don't respond right away, it's because we're just inundated with a lot of questions and inquiries, and we're planning to go to Singapore in like 2.5 weeks, so it's a little bit overwhelming right now. I do want to make a call out for VAFF. The Vancouver Asian Film Festival is having its virtual films as we are speaking today until Friday. Incredible films online. And then on Saturday, we have a full day of screening and industry panels, which Regina is running. She's lost her voice, so I'm going to make the PSA, public service announcement for her, is that please come on Saturday. It's going to be wonderful. And we have a special treat. Zarka Nawaz, who is the creator of Little Mosque on the Prairie, we're flying her in to do a master workshop. That's happening at 10 a.m. on Saturday. Very exciting, lots of great information. Then in the afternoon, we have the vertical short series. So that is going, I mean, micro dramas, short form storytelling, that is really the future for monetizing content. So you can't miss it in person. You have to come to Scotiabank Theater on Burrard Street. It starts at 10 a.m. is our first workshop, and then the screenings. And then on Sunday is the Ovation Awards Gala, where we really recognize the many great films that were in VAFF29. And also we have our Ovation Impact awardees, and it's going to be very exciting to have them doing really cutting edge work out there. And I think that's everything that's everything. So thank you everybody for joining us today. Check us out, check VAFF.org. Thank you to CMF, Telefilm, Ontario Creates. Thank you, because they're the ones who's going to fund us for some of these other markets that we're going to go to. And tomorrow there is another session at 11 a.m. With CMF, Telefilm, and Ontario Creates as well. So thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.